Hello, my wonderful third graders. We are still learning about astronomy, our solar system and beyond. This is lesson 6, stars and constellations. Some words, vocabulary words you'll hear throughout the read aloud. Constellations are groups of stars in the sky thought to look like people, objects, or animals. A ladle is a spoon or dipper with a long handle and a cup-like end used for serving liquids. Magnetic means exerting a strong attractive force. Navigate is a verb to find one's way. Orient, to identify your position in relation to things around you. Orienteering, a modern sporting competition in which participants orient their movements by compass or GPS, global positioning system, to accomplish a set of goals. Kind of sounds like an interesting sport. Polaris is the North Star, a bright star above the northern pole of Earth. A galaxy is a large collection or cluster of stars, dust, and gas held together by a force called gravity and separated from other star systems by a vast amount of space. The Milky Way is the galaxy that we live in, the Milky Way. We don't have an actual photograph of the whole Milky Way galaxy because no human or man-made spacecraft has ever left our galaxy to take a picture of it, right? Since we're in the Milky Way, we wouldn't be able to take a picture of it unless someone was able to go outside the Milky Way. But here's an illustration of what it would look like. Perhaps you observed a very hot flame, maybe on a gas stove or a Bunsen burner, or noticed that different parts of the flame have different colors. Maybe you've seen a campfire and how the flame can change colors. The blue and white parts of the flame are much hotter than the yellow or red parts. This is the same for stars. Blue and bluish white stars are the hottest. White stars are very hot. Yellow stars, like our sun, are medium hot, and red stars are the least hot. This is Orion and his hunting dogs. Perhaps you have observed a very hot... we already said that. So there's different colors of stars, and you can see how hot they are by what color they appear as. Sirius is the brightest star in our sky. Betelgeuse is one of the brightest in our night sky because it is both very large and fairly close to us in astronomical distance. Betelgeuse is red because it is not a very hot star anymore. Betelgeuse, that you can see here, you see that it's red, is a dying star that is starting to cool off. Astronomers predict that it will eventually explode and that it'll be so hot and bright that we will be able to see it during the daytime. Rigel is a very big star. Because of its size and very hot temperature, it is one of our sky's brightest stars. The blue star, Bellatrix, is one of the very hottest stars. And they go together to make the constellation Orion and his hunting dogs. It's time for us to head back home to planet Earth. From our home, we can see glimpses of space by looking up into the sky. After our journey, perhaps you won't see the stars as just little twinkling lights in the sky anymore. Now you know they are like our sun, the star that is the center of our solar system. You know that up close, stars are really massive powerhouses of super hot gas. If mass is the amount of matter in an object, what does it mean for a star to be massive? It'd mean it'd be full of lots of matter. The next time you stand looking up into the night sky, perhaps you will study the stars in a new way. They all look about the same size from where you stand on Earth, but you know they're not. They are different sizes. Some are brighter than others, and some are hotter than others. Maybe you once thought the stars in the sky were pretty close together, but after taking a ride in our special classroom spaceship, you remember that even though stars look close together in the sky, they are really very, very, very far apart. It's true that stars cluster together to form galaxies. Even when they are clustered together, most stars are still incredibly far apart from other stars in the same galaxy. And they are even farther apart from the stars of other galaxies. There's a lot of space in space. Look up at the sky and try to count the stars. There are a lot of them. On a clear evening, depending on where you are, you can see many of the 2,000 or so stars that can be seen from Earth with the naked eye. All the stars you see are in our own Milky Way galaxy. You can't see individual stars from other galaxies without the use of a telescope, but looking between the stars of our galaxy, you may be able to see the distant Andromeda Galaxy if it's a very dark night and you know just where to look. Who can tell me something about the Andromeda Galaxy that you learned earlier? It's the closest spiral galaxy to the Milky Way. It is spiral shaped. It is very far away, but not a lot is known about it. It's also known as M31. For thousands and thousands and thousands of years, people have been looking up at the night sky just like you. Human beings have tried to understand the location of the stars and predict their positions each night in the sky. In the grand scheme of the universe, it is human nature for us to try to understand why things are the way they are and where we fit in. It's a vast, vast universe, so big. Since ancient times, people have grouped the stars into patterns called constellations. Ancient civilizations saw these constellations as figures of people, animals, and objects. They played connect the dots with the stars by drawing imaginary lines between them to form pictures in the sky. These pictures often told familiar mythological stories about heroes like the Greek hunter Orion, who stands ready with his shield to fight a bull. They are about mythological animals like Pegasus, the beautiful winged horse. And they were about animals such as Canis Major and Canis Minor. Canis means dog in Latin, and Major means greater. Major. Sorry. If Canis Major is commonly known as the Great Dog, it's easy to see who might be following behind. In the stories about Orion, the Great Hunter, there's two constellations. These two constellations are Orion's faithful hunting dogs, forever following at the heels of their master as they move around the night sky. The very brightest star in our sky, Sirius, is the constellation Canis Major, and is in the constellation Canis Major, and is often called the Dog Star. Sirius is a very large star compared to our Sun and one of the closest stars to our solar system, only a little over 8.5 light years away. That's still very far. Here is reddish Betelgeuse, which forms Orion's right shoulder, and bluish-whitish Rigel, which forms Orion's left foot. This bluish star is Orion's left shoulder, is Bellatrix, a very hot young star. People who live in Earth's northern hemisphere see a different set of constellations than people in Earth's southern hemisphere do. Those constellations above Earth's north pole can only be seen by people in the northern hemisphere. Those above Earth's south pole can only be seen by people in the southern hemisphere. However, the constellations above the Earth's equator can be seen from both hemispheres. Maybe someday you'll cross the equator, travel to another part of the world, and experience the constellations of the night sky from another point of view. I did that when I went to South Africa and India. The night sky was different looking, with different constellations. Since ancient times, people have noticed that the stars in the sky and the familiar constellations move in a predictable and interesting way. All of the stars in the sky move in a circular pattern around one point. In the northern hemisphere, the half of planet Earth north of the equator, there's a star located very near the point in the sky that we call the North Star or Polaris. Even though all the rest of the stars in the sky change their positions throughout the night, the North Star is always located almost directly north. Wow, that's pretty. This time-lapse photograph is taken over a period of time during a dark night. Can someone point to the part of the sky around which all the other stars circle? Do you see where the North Star would be? Right there in the middle. Knowing this has helped sailors and travelers in the northern hemisphere for thousands of years to orient themselves. Long before modern navigational tools like compasses and GPS were invented, sailors relied on the star Polaris. Technology has advanced a great deal since those days, so much so that some people like to participate in a modern sporting competition known as orienteering, which where they use magnetic compasses and GPS to orient themselves and accomplish a task or goal. You might remember from an earlier lesson that the Earth has a North Pole and a South Pole. These poles act like a magnet. A magnetic compass works because of the Earth's magnetic field. A GPS is a modern device that uses man-made satellites orbiting the Earth to find and tell your position on Earth. So people like the Romans and the Vikings didn't have GPS, right? So they had to use the stars, especially the northern star, to tell where they were. Two patterns of stars you may already be familiar with are visible in the northern hemisphere are the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. Each one looks like a ladle in the sky. The Big Dipper and the Little Dipper are not the official names of the constellations themselves, but are part of two very famous larger constellations. The Big Dipper is a group of stars that is part of the constellation Ursa Major, which means greater bear in Latin. The Little Dipper is a smaller group of stars as part of constellation Ursa Minor. Ursa Minor is Latin for smaller bear. We commonly call them the Great Bear and the Little Bear. Suppose it is a dark, starry night and you are trying to find your way through the countryside. You can look up into the night sky and find the Little Dipper. The last star on its handle is the brightest star in the constellation. You just heard about this star named Polaris. It is called Polaris because it is almost directly above the Earth's North Pole. Once you find Polaris, you can find north simply by facing this star. When you are facing north, your back gets to the south, your right side is to the east, and your left side is to the west. Now all you have to do is decide which direction to go. Sometimes the Big Dipper is easier to see than the Little Dipper. You can also use the Big Dipper to find the North Star. Just line up the two stars opposite the handle of the Big Dipper's bowl and draw a line through them. The line points up out of the bowl of the Big Dipper right to the North Star on the tip of the Little Dipper's handle. And if you've got the North Star Polaris to point you in the right direction, who needs a GPS? People have been using the stars to navigate or find their way for thousands of years. People who live in the northern hemisphere today can still see these and other constellations when they look up in the sky at night. The runaway slaves before the time of the U.S. Civil War saw the ladle in the sky and sang a song telling them to follow the drinking gourd north to freedom. Throughout history, people in different cultures have looked up at the Big Dipper and have seen other pictures beside the famous Water Dipper. In one Greek myth or story about Ursa Major, the jealous goddess Hera, wife of Zeus, turns a maiden named Callisto into a bear. Then, to protect Callisto the bear, Zeus placed her in the sky as a constellation. An Arabian myth describes a coffin that is followed by three mourners. One Native American group saw a bear being followed by 3 hunters, one of them carrying the pan in which to cook the bear meat. The Norse people of northern Europe saw Odin's wagon. But what do you see if you live in the southern hemisphere? People who live south of the equator in places like Chile, South Africa, and Australia see a different set of constellations than the people in the northern hemisphere in places like the United States, Canada, Norway, Turkey, and China. On the other side of the world, as they rotate around the South Pole, people look out into the stars of the Milky Way galaxy from a different direction than people north of the equator do. You might be surprised to learn that there is no star directly over the South Pole. There is no South Star around which the rest of the stars circle, but there is a small constellation named Octans, very close to which circles around the spot where a southern star would be if it was there. Octans resembles an octant, an early instrument used for navigation. Not too far away is another constellation familiar to stargazers in the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross. Why do you think ancient people may have pictured an octant in this part of the sky? Both the constellation and the tool were used to help travelers navigate. How many of these constellations have you seen in the night sky? The constellations you've heard about today are just a few of the 88 constellations astronomers have identified in Earth's skies. Next time you have a chance to enjoy a dark starlit night, gaze up into the sky and see if you can find some familiar constellations. If not, have some fun and make up some constellations and stories of your own. Maybe someday you'll cross the equator, travel to another part of the world, and experience the constellation of the night sky from the southern hemisphere. All right, what is a constellation? Right, it's a group of stars that people have seen make a shape together. What do we call the star in the northern hemisphere that never seems to move? The northern skull, or Polaris. Why is it called the North Star? Well, because it's at the very north of the Earth, right? We can find it to help us find direction, and it doesn't move really. It's almost right there above the North Pole. Which important star patterns that circle closely around the star Polaris are known by many today as a pair of ladles? The Little Dipper and the Big Dipper. How does your point of view on Earth affect what you see in the sky? If you're in the northern hemisphere, you'll see different constellations than if you're in the southern hemisphere. What was the main idea of today's read aloud? The read aloud was mostly about what? We know that the sun is a star and appears very bright to us. Why is the sun not a part of any constellation we see in the night sky? Well, it's too bright for us to be able to see other stars in the sky at the same time. When you're looking at the stars of the night sky, the sun is on the other side of the planet Earth. What are some of the characteristics of stars that you heard about in today's read aloud? Stars have different colors depending on how hot they are. Stars are different distances from Earth. Each star appears brighter than others. Some stars appear brighter than others depending on their size and distance from Earth. What is the difference described in the read aloud among blue, white, red, and yellow stars? Blue stars are the hottest. White stars are very hot. Yellow stars are medium, like our sun. And red stars are the least hot. What is the difference between the verb orient and the activity called orienteering? Orient is how you figure out where you are. It's a position. Orienteering is an activity, something that people do where they practice orienting themselves. all right, using GPS or a magnetic compass. Our word for today is constellations. In the read aloud you heard, since ancient times people have grouped the stars into patterns called constellations. Say the word constellations. Constellations are groups of stars that appear to make a picture of an animal, person, or object. It is easy to pick out constellations like Orion and star patterns like the Big Dipper, especially when there are no clouds or light pollution in the sky. Do you think constellations looked the same 200 years ago? Do you think they will look the same 200 years from now? Okay, let's talk a little bit about poetry. I know some of you really like poetry. People are often inspired by the stars and constellations of the night sky to write poetry. You're going to hear a poem titled Escape at Bedtime, written by Robert Louis Stevenson in the 1800s. The poem is about a child looking out the window at bedtime and marveling at the stars of the night sky. Listen for the comparisons the poet makes about the number of stars in the sky, and to listen for the names of the celestial bodies and star patterns that the child recognizes. Alright, so this is Escape at Bedtime by Robert Louis Stevenson. The lights from the parlor and kitchen shone out through the blinds and the windows and bars, and high overhead and all moving about there were thousands of millions of stars. There never were such thousands of leaves on a tree, nor of people in church or the park, as the crowds of the stars that looked down upon me and that glittered and winked in the dark. The dog and the plow and the hunter and all, and the star of the sailor and Mars. These shone in the sky, and the pail by the wall would be half full of waters and stars. They saw me at last, and they chased me with cries, and they soon had me packed into bed. But the glory kept shining and bright in my eyes, and the stars going round in my head. What does the poet compare the number of stars in the night sky with on Earth? Do you remember? What do they compare with? Leaves on a tree? People in church or at the park? Crowds? Do you think this is a good comparison? What star patterns and celestial bodies are mentioned in the poem? We have a plow, a dog, a hunter, sailors, Mars. All right, good job, third graders. I hope you enjoyed learning about constellations.